was they weren't engaged in the management of what is a $300 million enterprise. $300 million of DEO's $1.3 billion budget and 2,300 people goes to the workforce system, the 100 locations, the 24 workforce boards in Florida. So we have a fiscal responsibility, we obviously have an audit responsibility, we have a program responsibility, obviously getting people back to work. That's what workforce does. I can tell you every month, actually every day, I don't know if you all know this, every day there's a report on the governor's desk and he wants to know how are we doing getting people back to work that are on the unemployment rolls and getting them off unemployment, and that's what the workforce group is all about. And through EmployeeFloridaMarketplace.com, which is the automated job placement system where there's 260,000 jobs currently as it exists in Florida, that's what he cares about. How is the $300 million investment in the workforce boards doing to get these people back to work, off of unemployment, or as we call it now in DEO, reemployment? And ultimately, his goal is obviously to get everybody, and being the jobs governor that he is, and I can tell you when he's on the road, he calls me in morning, noon, or night, 9 o'clock at night. I'm a morning person usually, but he says, I've been with this CEO, and they have a job up in the Panama City area. They need 300 people in Eastern Shipbuilding, and what are we doing to help them find those people, or Saveology in Fort Lauderdale, or what are we doing to deal with the American Airlines downsizing you might have seen. So at the end of the day, that's what the workforce board, just so you know, and we have a fancy chart in there that is in your handout materials. But at the end of the day, that's really what DEO and the workforce system, and the chart I'm referring to, we couldn't do overheads. I'm used to doing overheads and slides, and PowerPoint, I guess, is the current. Anyway, there's a chart in there that describes, if you're not familiar with what the workforce system looks like, where does DEO fit. I think that should give you basically an overview rather, of what these 24 workforce boards do. The next page will show you where they're located, and the structure is, there is a statewide group chaired by Chris Hart, more policy in nature. We are and programmatic in nature, but these workforce boards in large part are, and they're all about 35 people, thereabouts, so they're big boards, and they're all appointed locally by the counties, and these workforce boards are basically in multiple counties. So we're dealing with local officials in terms of their appointment. Now, there is guidance from DOL as it relates to the composition. They've got to be made up of this, that, and the other thing, and to represent a variety of the programs we are funded through from Department of Labor, and which is the primary source of our funding. But these one-stops, as they're called, are dictated by Department of Labor and the Training Administration, and providing career centers and arranging all these from free services, and then free services to a variety of places. In there is a compendium of workforce programs. I don't need to go through all of them, but at the end of the day, it highlights, in Wagner Pizer as an example, it's a labor exchange program and matches individuals seeking employment with employers, workforce investment, WIA. There's all these terms that I've learned too, by the way, and acronyms. And I went to DOL, and I said to Helen Parker, who's been the regional administrator up there at Atlanta, I said, I wish you would talk in English. It was the first day I didn't understand a word they were talking about when I was up there with our team, Tom Glendon. But anyway, those are the acronyms we live with. And WIA is individuals find jobs for career planning tools, help businesses find skilled workers, dislocated workers, REACT, Reemployment and Emergency Assistance Coordination Team, welfare transition, displaced homemakers, agricultural veterans. We work with Mike Pendergast and his team in terms of veterans issues, and when we have the quarterly meetings with all of the military base commanders, the two things they want to talk about, quite frankly, in large part, I noticed that we were 11 of the issues that came out of the base commanders meeting, and nobody was even half that many, quite frankly, of issues. It was either workforce related, what can you do to help the deployed servicemen's spouses go to work, or how are we helping veterans as they're coming back and going back into the workforce, or it's community development issues and base adjacency issues, and that side of DEO spends a lot of time on those kind of things, noise abatement and things of that nature. So anyway, our challenge is clearly, as you all know, in Florida is our unemployment rate. I can tell you every month we release the unemployment rate. Becky Rustin and our labor statistics group is responsible for all the private job growth and unemployment growth, and we go through an elaborate process under sequestered data. We've now had to certify who can have access, and I told the governor, you can't say anything to anybody until this is released, and you don't want to end up like the governor of North Carolina under investigation for inappropriate and untimely release of data. And so we've actually had to now go back and certify who has access to include the governor's office for this data, but we release all that every month. His main objective is obviously getting people back to work. We had a pretty good month. If you all didn't see, 28,000 people got private sector jobs last month, second best in his term as governor. But the workforce area plays an important role in that regard. But you know, at the end of the day, and as I said to the board members when I first met them, and I said this to Chris Hart first week I was on the job, I said, you know, it's kind of like baseball. I'm not a big baseball guy, but you know, 3 strikes and you're out. The workforce systems had 2 strikes. And when the governor has to send a letter like he had to do, and the political capital he expended, and more specifically the problems that this created and the distraction factor on this agency and all the other agencies, excuse me, at the end of the day, we can't have this ever happen again. Is what I said to Chris, and I just came from a meeting with a group of representative executive directors from the workforce system, because, you know, quite frankly, the ICCP tool you see in front of you, not everybody's happy with additional oversight and reporting to their board. But as I said to them, and I said this, and it's funny, when James Matthews was first in one of my first board meetings, I said, let me make it clear in banking what, from my experience, what my expectations are about audits and compliance reviews. And I used to, as part of management's evaluation, there was 5 things you were evaluated on, and which, you know, you keep your job, and I know we don't have raises and bonuses in this industry, but at the end of the day, hope and expect at some point in the future we may. But I said audit, control, and compliance are one of the 5 key areas that I evaluate you on. And from my perspective, if you have a repeat exception, because my agency is ripe with repeat exceptions, and Carolyn has heard this as well, and I said on a scale of, I guess in the state it's 5 is the best, 1 is the worst, that's a 2. Just, you're starting out there. You know, if you have no exceptions, no significant findings, you know, then I'm going to give you probably a 4 or 5, depending upon your control environment. And I'm being very selfish when I say that, because at the end of the day, as I said to the workforce heads, so we can spend a lot of time chasing audit exceptions and control compliance deficiencies, but at the end of the day, that doesn't get people employed. So we, you know, at the end of the day, we've got to operate in an environment from a fiduciary capacity, because I ran trust and investment operations for a long time. And we were in a fiduciary capacity, and I had an outside board of directors that oversaw my operation. Only area of banking, well, you all know this, that is the case. Melinda's a former banker. She knows something about this. So I used to report to the former head of Disney Resorts globally, Dick Nunes, and he is one tough SOB, excuse my vernacular, and he's since retired. Was the only guy other than Eisner was on the board of directors. And, you know, I can tell you he was very unforgiving about standards of performance, and some other Fortune 500 CEOs were on that board that oversaw my operations that I had to report to. And so control compliance, I lived in an environment where, you know, it's basically, it's the minimum expectation. So I can tell you that I got some interesting looks, including James, when I said, I don't expect repeat exceptions, I expect clean audits, and I expect timely resolution of issues. That's not to say we're not going to have issues. In my former life, I had security and control and compliance in an operating role. And, you know, quite frankly, we had as many internal defalcations and by a factor of 3 to 1 as a bank being robbed. So, you know, I understand those issues and the things we've got to do to ensure that we have the proper controls in place. And to that end, actually, Joe and I got together with our chief financial officer and our general counsel just this week and talked about creating basically a risk management oversight committee of senior leadership in our agency, looking at proactively on the hit parade that we've had a group of people steal, because we obviously deal with Social Security numbers, as many of you all do. So control compliance, to me, if you haven't gotten the message yet, is very important, and I don't want to embarrass the governor or myself for that matter. But you know, these workforce boards had questionable expenditures. They had deficiency in operations and management. We obviously, one of the things I've learned early on is we have endless numbers of media inquiries at DEO every day. I mean, it's amazing the amount of media inquiries we get from one thing or another, particularly because we're obviously responsible also for all of the economic development incentives, film incentives for the state of Florida. I personally have to sign off on every one of those, other than those that have to go to the governor. I still have to sign off on them before it goes to him. So at the end of the day, as you've read with Digital Domain, which was not under his watch, it was a legislative and governor's direction to do that deal, and we're now in bankruptcy court trying to get $20 million back, and I got to tell you, you know, the probability of that is slim to none, but at the end of the day, we're going to do everything we possibly can, and as well as the governor's requested a investigation of that whole incident and how it occurred, and how we have learned from that to do things better, different. So from my perspective, you know, again, and Joe and Melinda, I don't know what your time frame is. I suggested you might soon. Yesterday, I'm sure is the case. But you know, the bottom line of examples that are in your packages, we have the workforce board buying staff BJ, Costco, Sam's Club's cards, which they've repaid us. Unilaterally decisions to lease 1,000 computers that weren't necessary. You figure out how much that was, 50,000 chamber sponsorship, which in and of itself for workforce is not a problem, but it was never used, so quite frankly, was it ever a meaningful expenditure? We had question costs, the bottom line of $15 million, which we've worked down, and we talked about this morning, of 736 or 739?
739.
739, and with the board chair this morning. So this is a real current issue, quite frankly. It's still going on, and we're trying to wrestle this thing to the ground and get it behind us. But, you know, they had lavish improprieties with food and meals and capes and you know, and tickets to sporting events and expensive office renovations above and beyond what's appropriate, obviously, for state government. They're not the only ones in that regard. Actually, we got another workforce board that's paying us back right now in that regard. $3.4 million in misuse funds to renovate a building owned by the board. The funds were recovered, I might add. We had $2.4 million embezzlement by a board employee, $1 million recovered from the insurance, E&O and D&O insurance, and that person was convicted of 10 years in prison and 30 years probation and full restitution. Another almost $300,000 in undocumented expenditures. This is a lot of fun, you know, for auditors. But you know, quite frankly, you wouldn't believe the stack, a whole drawer, just of this case and the issues that we've had to deal with in the short time I've been with this agency. You know, all sorts of conflicts of interest, contracts canceled by the board after finding the vice president's wife for a training contract. I mean, about everything imaginable that you shouldn't do was done in Central Florida. And you know, we've had repaid costs from the board chair and employees that were convicted of fraud. Anyway, you get the message, $500,000. And so the bottom line is I challenged James before he got there, and Joe and his team with our chief financial officer and his team and legal. I said, I want a self-policing mechanism put in place where we have on a quarterly basis feedback from these executive directors and certification. That's what you have before you. And quite frankly, it's what I was used to in the banking business, where I want them to certify that they're controlled compliance environment so that we don't rely on once a year. Because I got to tell you, I don't believe once a year is worth a damn, excuse me. And, you know, a lot can happen in a 12-month time period. And on top of that, what I found that these 24 workforce boards didn't have a clue what was going on in many cases. And they weren't getting the feedback from their executive directors because there's so many people on these boards and they are appointed from a variety of sources locally. And not to say that they weren't doing a good job in most cases, but at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure that there was an early warning sign for the boards, the board chairman, and that there was a synopsis provided to them of what are the critical factors, and in your package, I think, is actually the actual ICCP program that we rolled out last month, right? And the first certification is September 30th. It's due to us in the next 2 weeks. And we're going to actually go, it's just like DOT, we're going to have stoplights. And since Joe came from DOT, and which we appreciate, and I'm still waiting for my 3 times return on investment. He said at DOT I used to find 3 times my cost of my operation in recovered funds. So I'm still waiting for that, and so he's going to turn into a profit center for DEO. But at that being aside, we're going to have red, green, yellow, obviously, and ways of ranking. And I tell you, they're very anxious about this because they want us. And I think some of what we've done in the past, quite frankly, at DEO, has been petty. This isn't petty. But I want to make sure that we're focused on the critical issues of government compliance related to these programs. And as I said even today, just before I came here to the workforce group, I said, we're not going to be punitive and we're not going to be petty. We're going to focus on the critical issues. We're not going to argue over $3.50. But at the end of the day, if you have indiscretions or if you have issues of noncompliance, or issues of obviously defalcations, we're going to be down your throat, quite frankly, and we want to make sure that we understand early enough in the game, because I said to the governor when I asked him, I said, how long do you plan to stay in office when he interviewed me? And he said, well, I hope to be reelected, because I asked him, I said, are you going to go through reelection 6 months ago when I was being interviewed by him? I said, because I'm here. I was enjoying retirement life, and I said I never want to go back into banking. It's not a lot of fun anymore, I can tell you. But at the end of the day, I want to be here for the long run. Hopefully outlast, hopefully 6 years rather than 6 months. I got to go through Senate confirmation, I understand. And I'm having my first visions of what that's like dealing with some of our legislative partners, and anyway, I don't want to go there. But you all know that business better than I do.